Well, as usual, I'm going to get the volume here. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this is the Talamanca Review. It's 12:23 p.m. on Sunday, the 9th of November. And today I'm going to talk about a topic that I've become, I don't know what you would call it, something of a qualified speaker about. Okay? And here I'm talking about Israel, and more specifically, the Third Temple of Solomon. Now, I'm going to go through a lot of things today, and a lot of them I've spoken about already. But hearing them in a fresh way, in a fresh context, I think is important. I think that constantly talking about it, incessantly talking about it, is what is required. Okay, so let's begin by taking a snapshot of the world. Okay? Various regions of the world. We have North America and Western Europe, which is collapsing. And it's collapsing under the weight of a world which has turned on it. And in many ways, that turning on the West is justifiable, in my estimation. Don't bite my head off. I'm not going woke. But I think that honest accounting is paramount. Honest moral accounting is paramount to resolving some of the problems of the world. You've got Russia, which is in a lot of trouble as well, fighting for its economic and existential survival as a culture, a very unique culture. You've got China, which is doing their thing. There's really good things about China, and there's bad things about China, just like everybody else. I'm not picking on them, okay? There's things about the Chinese system I'll openly tell you I admire. And there's things about their system, their collective consciousness that I find criminal. For example, the absolute lack of respect for intellectual property, right? Now it raises the question, should something be protected by patent? Should something be exclusive to the people who invented it, to the detriment of everybody else, unless they can afford to buy it? And I don't know exactly. That is a very interesting question. You see, through the scientific method, we deconstruct everything in nature. If human ingenuity and inventiveness produces something which materializes in the world, which itself, like the aspects of nature, can be deconstructed, reverse engineered, if you will, then because we do that to the natural system to better understand it and to better use it and to better make it work for us, we do this all the time. We do it with hydroelectric dams. We do it with our food supply. We do it in how we irrigate water and build canals when we're building cities like Amsterdam and Ottawa, my hometown, which has got one of the longest canals in the world from the old shipping days. So we used to use the water to move things around. Everything was on water back in the day. There were no cars, no trucks, no trains. Everything moved by water. Very interesting. You look at all the synthetic materials that people are building now. Synthetic materials have become a whole area of, it's an amalgamation of chemistry and biology and physics. Synthetic materials. And here I'm talking about things as banal as car seat material for car seats, right? Very, very interesting. You see a lot of these fabrics coming into the world now that are not natural. Hybrids of this and that, or completely constructed from the molecules up. You know, you're going to see things coming in the future where, you know, just weird stuff that's unnatural, like fabrics in automobiles that if you spill a coffee on your seat, it won't soak in and stuff like that because the material will be engineered to repel moisture. There's all kinds of stuff. It's coming into clothing now. It's coming into everything. But the point for the purpose of this podcast is that it is human nature to take things that are in front of us and break them down into their constituent parts so we can understand how those parts come together and manipulate them for our benefit. Now, if man himself is an extension of nature, and we are, then should the things produced by men and women be susceptible or vulnerable to the same degree of deconstruction, irregardless of what we call intellectual property, meaning nature didn't fabricate this, human ingenuity did, and we did it over years of research. Countless dollars were put into that research, and this is the basis of the capital system. And I have to say, this is probably the area in which China is most demonstrably communist. Disrespect for intellectual property is a pillar of the communist system. Okay, because intellectual property and patenting things is part of the equitable system of capitalism. So the theory is, very quickly, let's take a pharmaceutical. You want to create a pill that can do something and help people with a certain condition. You put a team of 12 chemists on it, they work for 3 years, they come up with something. How much have you invested? Well, let's say that each of the chemists is a PhD and each of them is making $250,000 a year, which would be a reasonable salary for a research chemist. There's 12 of them, so that's $3 million a year. They work for 3 years, so that's $9 million of R&D invested in the production of the pill, the medicine, the pharmaceutical. Plus you've got lab fees, you've got electrical costs, you've got equipment costs, you've got security costs, you've got the lease you're paying, or the mortgage you're paying on the commercial building that you built. So let's just round it up to like 12 million. And then you invent this pill that can do miraculous things that heretofore nothing could do, let's say, hypothetically, for blood pressure. Well, how long would it take you to make back that $10 million? And is the patent on the work and the intellectual, the the sovereignty of the intellectual property. We're actually talking here about giving sovereignty to inanimate things. Okay? This is one of the underpinnings of the capital system. Of course, there's no real intellectual property anymore. Everybody spies on everybody. You know, when we talk about spying, we generally limit it to just nations. So in Canada, we have the Canadian Secret Intelligence Service, the Canadian CIA. We've got the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, which are the equivalent of the FBI in Canada. You've got FBI, CIA, NSA, and who knows how many more, right? Who knows how many more? But that's not where spying begins or ends. Spying is a massive private sector practice now. Corporations use other entities, you know, military, you think like, let's say something like, I'm not sure what it's called anymore, but Eric Prince's Blackwater. Last I heard it was called Craft Services or something like that. I don't know what it's called anymore, but we're talking about a massive private army. Okay? All made up of private contractors who are generally former special forces. Okay? And they can be bought and contracted with by anybody to execute military campaigns, as long as, allegedly, as long as they fall within the framework of international law. But the West doesn't respect international law. If the West respected international law, Bibi Netanyahu would be in handcuffs in The Hague right now, awaiting trial. Okay? I'm reading all these MAGA people now going on and on about how it looks like James Comey's going to get off because there's going to be, they call it a nullification, judicial nullification, which means they quash the charges before they're ever really begun. The judge's opening statement was, this seems like indict first, investigate later. Very, very derogatory comment about the prosecution against Comey, setting the stage for him to get off. Okay? So very clearly you can see that justice works however it wants to work. There's no fixed rule. It's not an objective structure. You know, human beings are, in the West, we have built our entire reality upon the concept of objective truth. And I'm not sure objective truth even exists. From an enlightened perspective, there's no such thing as objective truth. Everything is malleable energy forming events. Okay, there's no such thing as objective. Well, gravity is an objective truth. Really? Then how did the Christ walk on water? And I believe he did. So if gravity is an objective truth, that objective truth is fractured by the Christ. It's fractured by every yogi who learns to levitate. It's fractured by every demonically possessed person who levitates off their bed in an exorcism. So gravity is not a fixed objective truth. You see where I'm going? Yet in the West, because of our scientific, objective, rational, peer-reviewed way of looking at reality, and nobody else lives this way, by the way. Everybody else lives within their cultural containers. We are the purest experimental culture on the planet, the West now, which is why we're so vulnerable. We're like a tree without roots. Okay? Boy, I'm getting far afield here. I mean, today's topic is Israel, but I go down these rabbit holes. I mean, you can just say one thing and I'm back. I'm back in this podcasting game. It was nice to take a couple weeks off, but I'm back. Okay. So China has no respect for intellectual property. Okay. Now, as we go through everything we're going through now, it's my thesis that at the center of all of it is a particularly nasty variant of Judaism that centers itself on the Talmud and the Kabbalah and has basically become the playground of ritual magicians. And it is not just Judaism anymore. There are many Gentiles involved in this at a very direct level. So Freemasonry would be the Gentile arm of the Kabbalah and ritual magic, which was shared by the Jews. Elements of it were shared, not the whole package. Goy aren't allowed to look at the Holy of Holies. A Freemason has been structured to only advance to a certain level. Okay? Even a 33rd degree Mason. The Kabbalists are way beyond that. Okay? In the understanding of the fourth dimension, and particularly understanding of ritual magic as a causal force acting upon our 3D reality and timeline to achieve certain goals and results. Okay? It's not a religion. Well, maybe my statement there is a little prejudicial. What I mean to say is it's not a religion like any other religion on the planet. Okay? Judaism, as it expresses itself today, is the religious equivalent of Blackwater and its role in the military structure of the world. It's this lone aberration that sits on its own, operates on completely different principles than every other religion on the planet, every other spiritual system on the planet, is recalcitrant to open up its books and show the world what it's really talking about. Now, the rabbis, they've made a few concessions in this regard. There's a lot of, I would say, good rabbis preaching on YouTube now. And they are preaching, or they're extolling the virtues of Judaic thought and Judaic perspective. But it cannot be denied that Judaism, among the family of spiritual systems on this planet, sits completely alone. And it is a guerrilla force. It is tactical. It is hostile. It is seeking power, dominion, and control over all other human beings on this planet. I don't know why nobody just comes out and says this. Maybe these people just don't understand it the way I do. Maybe the secret is to study many religions through your life. And maybe Nick Fuentes hasn't done that. Tucker Carlson hasn't done that. Candace Owens hasn't done that. They're just all starting to wake up to what I've been saying since 2000 when I wrote The Light of Darkness. It's like the Sesame Street song. One of these things is not like the other. Okay? Now, by the laws of free will, Judaism in its present form has every right to exist. And being copacetic with the will of the Creator, I like to think that I'm in line with the will of the Creator, I would defend Judaism's right to exist. Because by the laws of free will, it has a right to exist. So anybody who says it doesn't have a right to exist is completely out to lunch. But anything that is allowed to exist, which ends up in a causal relationship with autonomous individuals and entities around it, is subject to accountability. This is the principle. This is, and this is a bit tongue-in-cheek, you'll have to excuse me for this, this is the cornerstone of the argument. It is that they are susceptible to accountability. They are accountable for what they've done in Gaza. Spiritually accountable. Not just the claptrap, the endless rhetoric that the Jews are famous for. That's what their religion is. They start arguing at the bar mitzvah age. They put the two podiums together and the two 13-year-olds go at it. It's the same thing as Islam. They debate it. Boom, 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 boom. And you wonder why they become such good lawyers. They start practicing debate at a very young age. Okay? And so there's always the capability for the Jews to present a rational argument because they're very good with language. And they're very good at confusing and confounding circumstances. And the principle of magic is misdirection. Do the trick with the right hand while everybody is focused on your left hand. You understand? That's magic. It's a distraction. Okay? Now, because of the pervasiveness of the Jewish system, which goes far beyond the 7 million Jews living in Israel, or the 5.5 million Jews living in the United States, or the 500,000 living in France, the diaspora Jews, we'll call them, of which there's maybe 15 or 20 million of them on the planet, which in and of itself is extremely curious. Other people say, well, that was the Holocaust, Bruce. They lost a lot of their... No, they didn't. And even the population of Jews during the 1940s is suspect. I mean, these are an ancient people who allegedly had their own greater Israel 2,500, 2,700 years ago. I mean, the Chinese are up to 1.4 billion people. The Indians are up to 1.4, 1.5 billion people. The Middle East as a whole, what we'll call, irregardless of the various nation states within it, the Middle East is, I don't know, I don't feel like looking it up, but I'm pretty sure it's 1 billion, 1.5 billion people. Begging the question, where are the Jews? You ever think about that? Why is their population so small? Okay. Now, another curious thing about population, where it concerns the Jews, is the Orthodox are now breeding at 18th century Catholic levels. Orthodox Jews, Hasidics, and various other Orthodox institutions within Judaism are now having 6, 8, 10, 12 kids. Now. Why now? I mean, to the rest of us looking at this world, this seems to be the most precarious world I've lived in since I was born in 1966. A very precarious world. You don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. No idea. And yet the Jews are vigorously breeding into this. Ramping up their population. It's a population explosion in Judaism. Why? Why after 2,700 years of not breeding or limited breeding are they suddenly exploding their breeding pattern? What do they know that we don't know? What do they believe that we might not believe? Because I think it's more of a belief than a knowledge. Okay. Now, let's get back to this idea of the permeation of Judaism beyond Jews. So here we're talking mainly about the secret societies, and specifically the secret societies in which the Kabbalah was shared. Okay? Now, you can almost with a forensic certainty determine where there were Jewish diasporas in Europe based on the knowledge the culture has. Okay? So let's take, for example, something as incidental to this one I'm talking about now, seemingly incidental, as Aleister Crowley. Okay? Aleister Crowley was Scottish. Aleister Crowley was ethnically the same as me. Now, not many people know this, but Scotland had a long and persistent, very persistent, Jewish diaspora. And mainly because the two places that Protestantism took root first were Germany with Lutheranism and Scotland with Presbyterianism. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. And isn't it also interesting that the two progenitors of the Protestant movement, which fractured the domination of the Vatican after 1,500 years of ruling Europe, were the Germans and the English? So you get the Geneva Bible with Martin Luther in Germany, and he went deep into the Jewish material, read the Talmud, turned him into a vicious anti-Semite, by the way. When he saw what was in the Talmud, he could not believe what he was seeing. Okay? Then over in England, you've got the King James Bible. Now, this is all going on like 500 years ago. Okay? You need to understand the degree to which the unfoldment of our history has been rooted in the splintering of religions. And it persists to this day with what Israel is doing, which is what? A religion. Now, I find it very curious that after 400 years of collectively battling the Vatican and producing what we euphemistically call the Enlightenment in the West, which is a profound misappropriation of the word as it originally was meant to be used. Enlightenment means the dissolution of self as an egoic structure, where you exist purely as being. It's achieved after years of meditation or spiritual practice. Some people can just achieve it incidentally, but that's generally because of work done in a previous incarnation. Now, these two pivotal forces in the Enlightenment and in the restructuring of religion in Europe, the English and the Germans, they end up going head-to-head in World War I and World War II. How's that possible? Didn't they form an eternal bond in the Holy Spirit when they shattered the power structure of the avaricious Italians? And make no mistake about it, the Vatican has been a mafia structure since its inception. And anything Italians touch, they corrupt. It's just in their blood. And yeah, it's true, I'm rewatching The Sopranos now in 1080 DPI, but it's still true. They're a very corrupt people. And I'm not saying the Vatican wasn't corrupt. I'm not saying that the Germans and the English didn't need to do what they were doing. They did. But what I am saying is I find it curious that 300 or 400 years after they collectively shatter the power of the Vatican, they end up in a no-holds-barred war. You know, the two forces in World War I and World War II can be the Allies or the English, because the Americans worked under Allied command. They weren't, the American generals were taking orders from the British generals. This is World War II. The Americans were brought in as muscle. Okay? Now, the Germans, they figured something out. I think everything we've been told about the Germans is a lie. Now, do not confuse what I'm saying. Did the Germans become very, very dark? Absolutely. They absolutely became a very dark people in the phase of the war. But it's war. Were the Germans any darker than the Israelis are now with what they're doing to the Palestinians? No. No, not at all. My feeling on the Holocaust, I think it's a lie. I align myself with the British historian David Irvine. I align myself with the Catholic bishop, Bishop Williamson, and the Canadian social activist Ernst Sundell. There is no way the Holocaust happened. It's a lie. Okay? Now, this is not dismissing everything. The Jews were rounded up. The Jews were put in concentration camps alongside gypsies and alongside homosexuals. The Germans were practicing a form of euthanasia where they were killing their weaker and simple-minded people and their handicapped people. So we can clearly see that they became a people without a lot of compassion. Okay? I'm not putting them up on a pedestal. But remember the old saying by Nietzsche: if you're going to do battle with a monster, take care you do not become a monster yourself. So the question becomes, were the German people always monstrous? No. The Germans were the best of us in this model of living. Okay? And this model of living is reductionist, deconstructionist, scientific, and radically objective. The Germans were the pinnacle of Western consciousness. They led in everything. All the great philosophers of the century of philosophy, which was the 17th century, all of the great philosophers are German. Philosophy is considered one of the hardest things to get an advanced degree in. There's no math per se, but philosophy is as difficult to get a PhD in as physics. Okay? And yet, all of these philosophers are German. Hegel, Nietzsche, the list goes on and on and on. Okay? They invented many, many things, the Germans. Synthetic ink. Okay? Rather than using the ink from whales. Right? That was a very horrible thing what we did, by the way. Centuries of using whale fat and whale ink and hunting whales. Whales are extremely advanced creatures. Like, extremely advanced. We don't know a lot about whales. And I think the hunting of them was deliberate. I think it was to lower the vibration on the planet. Because there's things in nature which naturally raise the vibration of the planet. And the force that we're up against now is intentionally reducing the vibration of the planet. Keeping it low, keeping it boxed in, keeping hope out of reach, keeping the inner light out of reach, keeping the mystical out of reach, keep everything rational. Now, this is a Kabbalistic exercise. The maintenance of the seemingly rational is Kabbalistic magic, because behind the Kabbalistic pretense of a rational world is the darkest magic on the planet. And they're practicing it, and they know it. So every single time you see some Jewish intellectual get in front of a podium and espouse the virtues of rational thinking and objectivity, there's a good chance they're lying to you. Right? Let me ask you this. We get a lot of contradictory commentary out of the Jewish world. We get Norman Finkelstein, and generally, Noam Chomsky is another one. And generally, these people, the Jewish community refers to these people as self-loathing Jews, self-hating Jews, which I find very interesting, right? But even the most virulent of the Jewish critics of Judaism and its modern manifestation of Israel and its modern campaign of the Greater Israel Project, none of these voices take on Judaism at the religious level, which is where it needs to be taken on, where it needs to be invalidated. That is the most important thing right now, is taking the legs out from underneath them as a religious or a spiritual entity. Okay? So how come Noam Chomsky or Norman Finkelstein or any of the other Jewish critics who are Jewish, how come they never talk about the absurdity of rebuilding the temple? How come they never talk about the absurdity of animal sacrifice and blood ritual as a 21st century spiritual practice in a modern rational world? Do they not understand it? I mean, they're born and raised Jewish. They're raised by Jewish parents, Jewish grandparents. They undoubtedly commingled with rabbis. I mean, I know the basic Catholic doctrine, even though I don't practice it. I was raised Catholic. I'm culturally Catholic. I understand what I need to understand about that culture. And it's crazy. It's the craziest shit on the planet, crazier than Judaism. Just so you don't think I'm picking just on the Jews. I'm focusing on them because they seem to be the tip of the spear right now in destabilizing the world and creating the chaos we're living in. Okay? Now, I mentioned briefly in another podcast, but I would not mind going into a little bit more depth today, that oh, my thought slipped me there. It happens. Butterfly wings. We know now, and it's starting to come out, and everybody's talking about it now. Now the temple is a big topic. Okay? Big, big topic. Why do they need to build this magical temple? Why are there so many magical rituals around it? Why do they have to destroy a perfect red heifer and then burn it? Why? Where are these instructions coming from? Based on everything we know about God in the multi-spiritual world, in the world of Shambhala Press, which took upon itself the mission of translating the world's great scriptures and the world's great teachers and presenting them as a unified spiritual repository of the human race. Absolutely. They do everything at Shambhala Press. It's out of San Francisco. They're the ones that publish Ibn Arabi, by the way. They publish Milarepa's 100,000 Songs. They publish the Tibetan Book of the Dead. They publish the Egyptian Book of the Dead. They publish the lectures of the greatest Buddhist masters of the last 200 years. They publish everything. Everything. They publish the memoirs of Thomas Merton, a Trappist monk in the Catholic system in the 1960s. They are literally the repository of the world's religious information, or one of the repositories. And yet we're being taken back to a world which will religiously, if the Jews get their way, the third temple, and get dominion over the world. And make no mistake about this, stop letting them off the hook. They want to control the world. There's a Dr. Evil mentality in Jewish culture. Okay? And as I said, now I remembered what I was going to say. As I said in earlier podcasts, it is no coincidence the West is failing as Israel is rising. It's all part of the same magical equilibrium. Okay? There's nothing in the world that a Jew hates more than a Christian. There is no such thing as Judeo-Christian values. People who say there is such a thing, like Ben Shapiro, he's lying. Every single pastor or priest he sits down with, he's just doing that. That's his mission. If you want to look at it as a mission, like from a Mossad agent. His mission is to give stupid Americans the impression that there's a place for Christians in the Jewish world. There is no place for Christians in the Jewish world. It's apostasy, it's idolatry, it has to be forsaken, openly forsaken. You have to give up the Christ and Christianity, or under Noahide law you'll be killed. Where is there any space for Judeo-Christian values there? So why is Rabbi Shmuley talking about Judeo-Christian values? Why is Ben Shapiro talking about Judeo-Christian values? Meanwhile, every public-facing rabbi in Israel on YouTube is saying the exact opposite. The West will die. The West is Rome, and Rome is slated for death. Now you got to remember the other big thing with the Jews. When the Jews talk about God, they're talking about themselves. It's the ultimate form of conceit. Now, in a sense, if you want to get really semantic about it, God is us and we are God. But God is the deepest part of ourselves. And when God is realized, the more extraneous components of ourselves disappear. And you're sort of left as this floating spiritual force in a body. And you give off a kind of a Buddha field, if you will. It's not hard to recognize people who are energetically centered, whose consciousness has done a partial or complete migration back to the Creator. There's a field around them. You can feel it. That's why they paint the pictures with the halos all the time. Right? There's none of this in Judaism. When Jews talk about a holy person, they're talking about something completely different. They actually have contempt for saints. The universal concept of a saint, whether it be an Indian saint, whether it be a 12th century Catholic saint, whether it be a Persian saint, the person who attains that perfect Buddhic field of compassion and transforms everyone they come into contact with. That's what a saint is. Jews have nothing but contempt for that. You think I'm lying? Look it up. I'm telling you the truth. One of these things is not like the other. So when you look at the whole world, there's a universal religious consensus. And that universal religious and spiritual consensus is that human beings are evolving to be in communion and commiseration with the primary energy outside of time and space that created us and sustains life and all the permutations of life. This is the Buddhist idea. Even though the Buddhists say there's no God, there's a region of consciousness that we can say in the Buddhist journey correlates to what we call God in the Western tradition. Forget the semantics. It's an evolution of being and person. Okay? So the age of Pisces and the ending of the age of Pisces, which is happening now, is fundamentally about stamping out the energy not suitable for the age of Aquarius. And that energy wears a black fedora, a black suit, and wants to spill blood in a magical temple. And it has much allegiance in the Christian world through the guise of Freemasonry, which is, as I said, Judaism light, Miller Genuine Draft, Miller Light. Freemasonry is Judaism light. And this tiny little population, 9 million, but 2 million of them are Arab Israelis. So there's 7 million Jews. This tiny little population, smaller than New York City, one city in the United States, in North America, on the continent of America, in the world, of which there's probably about 9 billion people now. One little country of 7 million people, smaller than New York, smaller than Chicago, is destabilizing the entire world. How is that possible? How could one little group of people punch so far above their weight? And it's not like they're masters at weapons manufacturing. Most of the weapons they use are imported from other countries. What is it? Well, money is one thing. They got a foothold in money, beginning with the Bank of England, and then through the Bank of England, through the entire banking system in Europe. People didn't really understand money when it started to be used in paper format. People still don't understand it 400 years later. People do not understand what money is. The Jews do. And it's one of the ways they've become so powerful. Okay? And the other thing is, of course, magic. Now, this is the thing that you can't really say, because we live in a rational world, and only an irrational idiot would say out loud that magic runs the world, even though it's the truth. Okay? So I'm doing my part. I'm saying the uncomfortable truth out loud, the truth that nobody else will say. Now, I revisited this topic. I was actually a little bored with it. I haven't spoken about this in a direct way for quite some time now. And one of the reasons is, what more is there for me to say? I had an email come in from a buddy of mine, my Buddhist friend. And he's over in South Korea at a Buddhist temple. He spent most of his adult life in meditation. He's originally Venezuelan, and then he became Canadian. And then using Canada as a launching pad to go out into the world, into various monastic systems, but specifically Vipassana. And he sends me this email a couple days ago. I hadn't heard from him in months. He says, Bruce, I'm going over all your BitChute videos on the Brian Roux show again. Everything you said in 2020 is 100% accurate for today. And nobody could understand it when you were saying it. And I went, yeah. And I owe that, in large measure, to Robert taking the time to explain magic to me. I am the product of the tutelage I've received. But once given that little kernel of information, I capitalized on it. I did my own research. So, this isn't going anywhere quick. If you think this is ending, you're crazy. It's not ending. Okay? This is just, there's something, we can all feel it now. Okay? So something big has to happen now. And something big has to happen because everybody's wising up to the Jew game. They don't have too many friends left. Some of the Jewish voices out there now are completely insane. Completely insane. Like Rabbi Shmuley is completely insane. In fact, I would go so far as to say Judaism has entered into a cultural psychosis. They're collectively psychotic. They have entered into collective psychosis. So, how is this all going to end? I don't know. I do know ultimately how it ends. I don't know what we have to go through to get there. But I know ultimately how it ends. Ultimately, the Jews are destroyed. I don't say that with any glee. I don't say that in any way to be representative of what one might consider to be a victory. I don't consider it a victory, them being destroyed. And ultimately, what's going to happen is they're going to fulfill, in a unique way that nobody saw coming, they are going to fulfill the idea that they're God's chosen people. But number one, it's not God, as I've tried to explain what God is in this podcast. They're not talking about the same thing as the rest of us. Begging the question, what are they talking about? Okay, if it's not God, what are they talking about? The vast majority of people on this planet do not believe in God. Doesn't mean they don't believe in spiritual practice and growing your consciousness and becoming more aware. But the idea of a God is a uniquely Abrahamic and Jewish idea. And every religion coming after it has been poisoned with the one God idea, which was insinuated into the human race as a war agenda. And the Jews still haven't figured that out, or they have, and they're just okay with it. They're okay with it. They're okay with being a warmongering people who want to take control of the world. This is the state of the world in 2025, toward the end of 2025. I will say this, it seems to me as though something is working in our favor. Some grace, some force is protecting us, because I honestly believed it was going to be a lot worse by now than it is. I mean, it's pretty bad. Okay? The West is collapsing. Canada's almost finished. There's talk now about the Canadian currency canceling out. Completely canceling out. Like being reduced to rubble, like the Deutschmark between World War I and World War II in Germany. That's openly being discussed by economists now. The mismanagement of the country has been so severe under Justin Trudeau and now Mark Carney. You want to see a captive country? You want to see mind control at its best? Look at Canada. They're idiots. All right. I don't know what I'm going to title this. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this has been the Talamanca Review.